Yep, every Nintendo generation on 3DS. I can't wait to explain how this fucking thing is gonna work on here. Listen, man, the 3DS was a powerful little titan in Nintendo's handheld lineage. Mainly because not only did it have a stellar original lineup of its own, but it also had a ton of Nintendo's legacy on it. So much so that you could make the argument that every single console from Nintendo's past was covered on the 3DS in some way. And I just kind of want to cover all the different generations of Nintendo you could experience on the 3DS. Starting with, who gives a shit? Yeah, playing NES games is nothing to really write home about these days, but when NES games were available on 3DS, that was a pretty brand new thing at the time, at least for Nintendo fans officially. I mean, you could definitely play NES games on like mobile phones at that point. Even officially, I remember I had Mega Man 2 on my iPod Touch. But virtual console games at the time were only really known to be on the Wii. When the DSi came out and the DSi Shop channel was a thing, I remember thinking like, oh wow, what if they have virtual console titles on there? No, that never happened. We had to wait for the 3DS, but I'd say it was worth the wait. When the eShop launched on the 3DS, we got Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, and a few months later, we got NES titles. And NES titles on the 3DS Virtual Console are NES titles on the 3DS. They aren't 3D or anything, but you can play multiplayer by holding L and R, and then you can swap to the different controllers. So that way, if you're playing something like Super Mario Brothers with alternating multiplayer where, you know, I play, and then when I die, you play, and then when you die, I play, you can just easily pass it off amongst each other. These right here were the only NES games I bought back in the day. The original Mario 1, Mario 2, Mario 2, Mario 3, Mega Man 2, Punch-Out!, and Clue Clue Land I bought as a joke. I didn't dabble a ton in NES games at the time, mainly because I primarily bought my NES games from Nintendo's Virtual Console on Wii U. I wasn't really bringing my 3DS places, so you know, I kind of just went for games that I kind of wanted to play like in the bathroom, I guess. And I love Punch-Out!, and I love Mega Man 2, and you know, Mario 1, you know, is fun to just kind of blast through and speed run. So those were the ones I picked. Do you have a problem with that? Now, speaking of Mega Man 2, though, there were other ways you could play NES games on the 3DS. I do have this solution right here, the Mega Man Legacy Collection. This was kind of a big deal when it was first released in August of 2015. You know, this was like the first major Mega Man release since like Mega Man 10 in 2010. And the 3DS version didn't release until like February of 2016. I always found a 3DS release to be a little like odd. Most of these games, if not all of them from what I remember, were available separately via the Nintendo eShop. You know, they were all on NES Virtual Console. To be fair, this was a better deal. You know, each of these games separately was $5 a pop. So, you know, you add that all together and it's 30, which I believe was the asking price for Mega Man Legacy Collection. But you keep in mind, you get a bunch of extra content with this. You get challenges, a museum mode, all that good stuff. But for $50, you would get the old special edition with the Mega Man amiibo covered in gold, which is just the cheapest, crummiest addition to any special edition thing of all time. Like, it's literally just the Smash Brothers Mega Man amiibo, but it's gold. The amiibo packaging itself is completely blank. Like, what the hell is this for? But yeah, here's another solution to playing NES games on 3DS. There was also the 3D Classics line, which mostly were NES games. This is something I really wish they did more of. You know, 3D remakes of original NES games. Stereoscopic 3D, that is. You ain't playing an Urban Champion from behind the shoulder, buddy. It's pretty much just the NES games as you remember them, but some of them are in widescreen, and you know, you get that stereoscopic 3D effect. They have some enhancements, they have some improvements, but you know, you kind of feel like they were running out of steam halfway through. Like, the first half of the games are completely in widescreen, and the latter half of the games are still in 4:3. And the game selection is just bizarre. Like, Excite Bike, Urban Champion, Xevious, Kid Icarus, like why? Like, I feel like they just kind of pulled these out of a hat. You know, you'd think they do like the original Legend of Zelda with the 3D effect, you know, top down. That would have been pretty cool. Or even like Mario 3 with the whole stage play aesthetic, the fact that all the platforms have like a shadow casting on the background, like that could have been kind of neat. But regardless, we only got 6 3D Classics games. Damn. I know my weekend plans are ruined too. But for the most part, it's pretty easy to play NES stuff on 3DS, much like Game Boy games. I definitely picked up a lot of Game Boy games on Virtual Console, so this was another system offered. And yeah, the games play pretty damn well on 3DS. I love that you can hold L and R and switch to just ass green. But I find it weird that they have the little secret of when you hold select while starting up, then you get this whole Game Boy border on screen. This feels like, why is this a secret? Doesn't this make more sense as like an option to toggle on and off? Even kind of like the whole like holding L and R to do the whole, you know, green thing there. They even do something where if you use a 3D effect, the screen sinks in, you know, kind of like you're viewing on an actual Game Boy. You know, they did a lot of cool stuff with Game Boy on Virtual Console, especially when they introduced the Pokemon games. You know, they also had Pokemon Bank support. You could wirelessly trade. But Game Boy games on 3DS is pretty cut and dry. They're on the system. There's also remakes, specifically Metroid Samus Returns, which is a remake of Metroid 2 Return of Samus. So much so that this barely even resembles the original. But Game Boy representation is here and accounted for, much like Game Boy Color, which in many ways is considered the same system. I mean, it is on Nintendo Switch Online, and Nintendo usually groups Game Boy and Game Boy Color together when talking about the systems. I mean, like, it's just kind of weird to me sometimes. Like, I get it, but it's also like Game Boy Color had so many exclusive games, it just feels a little strange. But yeah, we have a couple of Game Boy Color games available on the 3DS. You know, the Pokemon games there released on Virtual Console as well. I remember a big release was Shantea on Game Boy Color Virtual Console because that was an incredibly expensive release, and also Shantae has just had a large presence on, you know, the modern Nintendo handhelds. I mean, you know, she had a presence on Game Boy Color, and she almost had a presence on Game Boy Advance through the initially canceled Shantae game there, but that got resurrected later down the line. But I digress. Shantae has had like a pretty big presence on like DSiWare with Risky's Revenge, and then on 3DS, you know, you could play Risky's Revenge through the DSiWare backwards compatibility, but they also had like Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, and of course, the original Shantae released on Game Boy Virtual Console. But we also have Toki Tori here, which, yeah, you could play the original Game Boy Color version or a remake released on Nintendo 3DS, which I believe was the same remake available on like WiiWare, Wii U, Switch, like, it's pretty much available everywhere. But hey, I don't want to blow past a huge part of Nintendo's handheld lineage. We have the Game & Watch. That's right, you saying I don't give a f doesn't faze me. Nintendo re-released a couple of Game & Watch games on DSiWare, and of course most DSiWare games were available on the Nintendo eShop. So here I have Mario Cement Factory, and because the 3DS is backwards compatible with DS games, you can play the Game & Watch Collection 1 and 2 on your 3DS. There's also the Game & Watch Gallery games, and those were on Game Boy and Game Boy Color, and those games were available on Virtual Console, so, you know, you could definitely play Game & Watch games. Thank God, right? We also have Super Nintendo games available on the 3DS, but only the new 3DS. Yeah, in March of 2016, Nintendo announced that Super Nintendo games were finally coming to the new 3DS models exclusively. What a fucking joke. These games could definitely run on regular 3DS hardware. They just needed a single damn reason to sell the new 3DS to you. And Super Nintendo games are a pretty damn good reason. I mean, like, hey, uncompromised Super Nintendo games on the go? What a great idea. We hadn't really had that up until that point. The Game Boy Advance is often seen as a Super Nintendo on the go, but, you know, you kind of had a bit of compromises there. You know, you have the screen crunch problems. The screen's more zoomed in on these ports to the Game Boy Advance. So, yeah, sure, you have Super Mario World on the go, but, like, at what cost? But Super Nintendo games on new 3DS Virtual Console actually were pretty damn cool. Problem was they came out at a time when it was like, nobody gave a damn. It was spring of 2016. I wasn't playing virtual console games at this time. I was feverishly waiting for the Nintendo Switch to get announced because I was so fucking sick of the Wii U at this point. They actually had a very full lineup of SNES games on the new 3DS. You know, you got all the Donkey Kong countries, Earthbound, Castlevania games, pretty much all the major Nintendo games you could want. The only one I actually have here is Zelda: A Link to the Past, just because like that was the one that I wanted to test the virtual console experience out on my new 3DS here. And yeah, the games look great, they play great, especially with the new 3DS system here. You know, you have the colored buttons, which are an homage to the Super Famicom button layout or the SNES in Europe button layout. Outside of virtual console, I mean, like, there are a couple SNES games remade on DS. You can play those on your 3DS. So, you know, we have Kirby Superstar remade as Kirby Superstar Ultra, which, you know, I didn't think twice about this game when it was being advertised to me as a kid. I just thought this was just a Kirby game. That shows you the power of the port, man. Like, dumb fucking kids don't know the difference. They don't know you're being sold old garbage. And of course, you have Chrono Trigger. I understand these are, you know, ports, remakes of games on the DS, so, you know, it makes sense. But just the fact that these Super Nintendo games fundamentally ran on the DS. I know they're remakes, but still. You could fundamentally play these Super Nintendo games on the DS, but Nintendo tried to sell us the fact that you need a new 3DS to play Super Nintendo games. Never mind the fact that you can definitely hack a 3DS and emulate Super Nintendo games on normal 3DS hardware. No, no. It only works on new 3DS. What are you, stupid? Of course it does. Well, that covers all the systems available on the 3DS Virtual Console. Kind of. Because, of course, we have Game Boy Advance. I have a couple of games right here that were remade for the 3DS that were originally released on the Game Boy Advance. And you could play Game Boy Advance on the 3DS. Sort of. So the 3DS initially launched at stupid prices, and Nintendo had to quickly course correct. They slashed the price of the handheld, and to apologize to people who bought the system early on and twiddled their thumbs for a couple months because there were diddly dick games to play, they offered these early adopters 10 free NES Virtual Console games for the 3DS and 10 free Game Boy Advance games for the 3DS. Now, all those NES games eventually were made available on the eShop, but the Game Boy Advance games never were. I don't know what the hell was going on there. I don't know why they never offered them, because Game Boy Advance games obviously worked on the 3DS. They worked enough to offer to consumers, millions of them in fact, because, you know, the 3DS did sell millions before they slashed the price, but not to any other 3DS owner, only those that bought it before like August of 2011. But to be fair, these games are weird because Virtual Console games are emulated. You know, you can do save states and you can change a filter on the Game Boy games. Game Boy Advance games aren't emulated. They're actually running natively on the 3DS, and from my understanding, it's kind of based on the fact that the 3DS has a DS fundamentally built into it, and since the DS was able to play GBA games natively, like, that's how the GBA games are running on the system. Of course, this is coming from a fucking idiot who doesn't actually understand a lick of programming or anything to do with any of this stuff. So this is like my, like, Dumbo baby bullshit take on the matter. But yeah, the GBA games are running natively on the 3DS. They didn't like port the games to it. It's pretty much like these games can run on the 3DS, but the 3DS isn't powerful enough to like emulate Game Boy Advance games, which is why like you don't have save states, and there's like a weird thing where like you can't suspend the game via the home menu or anything, or, you know, like sleep mode doesn't work properly. Like when you shut your 3DS lid, the game keeps playing. So that's a little strange. But hey, 10 Game Boy Advance games are playable on 3DS in very specific ways. And they're damn good Game Boy Advance games. The 10 games you got as a 3DS ambassador were fantastic. I mean, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones, Minish Cap, Metroid Fusion, Mario Kart Super Circuit, Yoshi's Island, Mario vs. Donkey Kong, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. It's just some amazing games, like some of the best Game Boy Advance games you could have asked for. Which is a shame considering, like, we got nothing Game Boy Advance on this system if you didn't buy a 3DS in those early months. For us non-ambassadors, this is pretty much the only Game Boy Advance stuff we got on the 3DS. Remakes of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, and a remake of Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. And Ruby and Sapphire are pretty extensively remade. Superstar Saga is pretty faithful. It's a really good remake of the original. This is probably the most faithful general GBA game you can get on 3DS without wasting your money on a 3DS in 2011 and getting 10 free Game Boy Advance games as an apology from Nintendo, that is. The Nintendo 64. This is like a really strange thing for both the DS and the 3DS. The fact that we got like a handful of Nintendo 64 games, but like not a ton overall. A lot of times they were all kind of clumped together. It's like we would get like a lot of N64 games one after another, and that was it. So on the 3DS itself, early on in the system's life, we got Ocarina of Time 3D, a very, very good remake of the original classic. You know, the way they remade it was kind of like, hey, it looks as you remember Ocarina of Time looking. You know, they spruced up a lot of things, but they didn't spruce it up enough where, you know, like it would look visibly like that different. But then when you compare it side to side, it's like, oh, holy shit. Like they really did a number to this game. And then a few months after this one, they did Star Fox 64 3D. I always like when they remake games with 64 in the title. It's like, yeah, that's funny, especially when they add another 2 characters to the title. Because they did exactly that on the DS, Super Mario 64 DS. So yeah, for some reason, both on the DS and the 3DS, Nintendo really wanted to push Nintendo 64 games remade at the beginning of the system's life. Because Mario 64 DS was a launch title, and a damn good one at that. I mean, like, this was incredible on the DS. Of course, the one problem being, it was fucking horrible on the DS. Just being restricted by the D-pad just really made this hard to consider the definitive version of Mario 64. But of course, with the 3DS having the circle pad, that made it really great to revisit this game. It didn't fix things really at all, but I think it made Mario 64 DS like a lot more comfortable to play. But hey, that wasn't the only Nintendo 64 game remade on DS. Here we have Diddy Kong Racing DS. This is like a weird ass like sleep paralysis demon. Like, does anybody think this actually exists? For all you know, I could have printed this cover off and I could just be shitting you at this point. I'm not. This is weird. Of course, this was when Rare was owned by Microsoft, so they did allow them to come back and work with Nintendo on this remake of Diddy Kong Racing on the DS. And you know, it is still Diddy Kong Racing, but like, god damn, like, this is just a strange release. It's just something, like, you know exists, but like, you're also like, what? It does? We also had Rayman 2 on the DS and the 3DS. Neither one is confident enough to say, I'm Rayman 2, bitch. Instead, they try to do, like, this weird false advertising nonsense where they're like, oh, it's Rayman DS. It's Rayman 2. Oh, it's Rayman 3D! It's Rayman 2. I feel like a lot of people potentially bought either one of these games thinking like, oh, it's a brand new game. No. But Rayman DS is closer to Rayman 2 on the Nintendo 64, while Rayman 3D is more like Rayman 2 on the Dreamcast. Regardless, this is still Rayman 2. Stop lying. And of course, Majora's Mask 3D. You know, after Ocarina of Time 3D, this was the next logical step, but, you know, for a while there, it was kind of up in the air as if it would happen. You know, Nintendo's developers wanted to play coy, like during interviews, they would be like, oh yeah, I've never thought of doing Majora's Mask 3D. That's a great idea. Bullshit. This finally released in early 2015, right alongside the new 3DS XL here in North America. And nowadays, this is considered the worst version of Majora's Mask. They just kind of messed up a lot of the movement. It kind of messes with a lot of the boss fights and the pacing of the game. I don't think this is a bad version in a vacuum. Like, you can still play this and get the Majora's Mask experience, but compared to the N64 game, you know, this one has a couple of problems. But regardless, it is a Nintendo 64 game on the 3DS, and yeah, you can play all of these games on the 3DS, making the 3DS, a system with a handful of Nintendo 64 games available, but not a lot at the same time. It's in this weird space. Like, man, they were able to get a lot of Nintendo 64 games running on the 3DS. A lot of the biggest ones in general, Mario 64, which is a DS game, Ocarina of Time, a Star Fox, they just stopped there. It's kind of weird. I mean, I respect they restrained themselves, but like, come on, like, I think N64 games on the 3DS are kind of neat. Much like GameCube games on the 3DS. I mean, that is awesome. Oh my god. Yeah, throughout the entire 3DS lifespan, we barely got any original GameCube games ported to the system. We got games from future consoles like the Wii U, even the Nintendo Switch brought over to the 3DS. GameCube was really underrepresented on the 3DS. Which is kind of strange considering like the few games that we did get from the GameCube happened very early on and very late. So we got Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell 3D right around the start of the 3DS's life in early 2011. And this is a 3DS remake of Splinter Cell Chaos Theory from the GameCube. That's all I know about it. Not a big Tom Clancy guy, but I do own this, and I do know it was originally a GameCube game. I know more about Luigi bullshit, alright? This is Luigi's Mansion, the original game. This game's existence is so interesting. This got announced like a year after the Nintendo Switch already launched. So this was one of the 3DS games that they announced when everybody was like, stop supporting the 3DS, nobody cares anymore. And also, a Luigi's Mansion 1 remake was definitely more wanted on the Nintendo Switch. This is an incredibly beloved game, so to have this game that everybody loves remade on the damn 3DS of all things in 2018, it's like, come on, man. I mean, it makes sense why they did this. This occurred about a year before Luigi's Mansion 3 hit the Nintendo Switch, so this was kind of like a little appetizer to that, especially considering they feature Gooigi in this game, who then became like a legitimate gameplay mechanic in Luigi's Mansion 3. And Luigi's Mansion 1 on 3DS is more of just an option to play co-op in this game. But when it came to supporting the 3DS this late in its lifespan, you can tell the games Nintendo was pumping out for it were very much like, okay, what's something that, has market potential, but also fairly easy to do. And for the most part, that meant remakes, remasters, ports, all that stuff. And as Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon was already on the 3DS, there was already kind of an audience for Luigi's Mansion games on the handheld. Now, I don't know how much of that audience was still around in 2018, but I digress. As much as I would have loved to see this on the Nintendo Switch at the time, having Luigi's Mansion 1 on the 3DS was almost kind of like destiny, because there was that talk about how the original game was originally designed for stereoscopic 3D, and, that eventually got scrapped from the original release. So to have this on the 3DS with a 3D mode, it kind of felt like, oh man, everything came full circle. And to have Luigi's Mansion 1 on the 3DS and Luigi's Mansion 2, and it's kind of cute. The game itself works pretty well on the 3DS, it's not my ideal place to play Luigi's Mansion, but, considering Dark Moon is here too, like I said, it's kind of cute. What also is kind of cute, how this box art is like this weird amalgamation of like everything. Like, we have a brand new Luigi render here, but then all the ghosts surrounding him are just ripped directly from the original GameCube box art. And then we go to the back here, and then it's using all this old-ass GameCube art of Luigi. Like, everything looks super outdated here. When it comes to some games that are kind of a stretch to consider, like, oh yeah, GameCube games are on 3DS. I mean, we have Resident Evil, The Mercenaries 3D, and The Mercenaries was, a mode in Resident Evil 4. And I remember some people were considering like, oh man, if, we have The Mercenaries 3D on 3DS, imagine a Resident Evil 4 port on 3DS, which did seem fairly reasonable or possible. I mean, Resident Evil Revelations was on 3DS, and that game looked incredible. And RE4's shtick is that it's like on every single system known to man. I mean, they put it on the damn Zeebo. I feel like they probably could have got it running on the 3DS, and the Mercenaries 3D, I mean, like, this isn't really, like, actually, like, oh, yeah, it's Resident Evil 4's Mercenaries mode on the 3DS. Like, no, it's kind of just, like, its own little thing, but I'm just making excuses at this point for like, all right, this is kind of a GameCube game on 3DS. I mean, we also have Mario Party the Top 100. There's a fair amount of mini games in this game that are directly ripped from the Mario Party GameCube games. But at that point, like, what? Like, should we consider Super Smash Brothers for 3DS? That has stages and music and all of that from Smash Brothers Melee. And, you know, there's also Mario Kart 7 that features Mario Kart Double Dash stages. I don't know, man. Pac-Man World 3. This is kind of the same game as on the GameCube. Like, it's pretty impressive they got it to work on the DS. But there's my bullshit take of the day. You want to play GameCube games on the 3DS? Play Pac-Man World 3 on the DS, buddy. Of course, that brings up the DS. So, DS games playable on 3DS. This is fairly straightforward considering all 3DS models are backwards compatible with DS games. You're not going to be able to play like every DS game to its fullest potential. You know, the games that require the GBA slot, like, you know, Guitar Hero on Tour, you know, you can't really play that on 3DS. But for the most part, yes, you can play pretty much any DS game that you'd want on the 3DS. But that didn't mean that they stopped themselves from remaking DS games on the 3DS. Here we have one of the worst decisions Nintendo's ever made. Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story plus Bowser Jr.'s Journey. Who thought this was a good idea? You know, this pretty much bankrupted the original developers of the Mario and Luigi games, Alpha Dream. It was this remake's failure that kind of put them over the edge and they had to shut down. Which is really sad, but at the same time, I gotta ask, like, why did you think this remake was gonna work? You know, he already did one remake here, Superstar Saga, so you did the first game, and that made all the sense in the world, you know? You take the game that's not playable on the 3DS, and you remake it, adding to the DS games and the 3DS games in the Mario and Luigi series, making the entire franchise playable on the 3DS. That was pretty cool. What the f was the point of this? This already released in 2017. People were already getting tired of the 3DS at this point. This released in early 2019. What the hell was the point of this? You could already play Bowser's Inside Story on the 3DS, and this one didn't necessarily need a remake. It was just kind of one of the fan favorites, the most popular Mario and Luigi game, and it just felt an excuse to put a new Mario game on store shelves. There wasn't any point to this other than to just have a new Mario and Luigi game just available on the market. But regardless, there you go. You have a DS game remade on 3DS. You know, there was a couple other ones, you know, some Shin Megami Tensei games, you know, like the Devil Survivor games, there was Strange Journey, some of the Etrian Odyssey games, the Phoenix Wright games, you know, there was Phoenix Wright Trilogy on 3DS, which, you know, remade a bunch of DS games, but those originally were Game Boy Advance games in Japan, so there you go, all right? I misspoke. There were some other Game Boy Advance games technically on 3DS. But of course, staying in the era of the Nintendo DS, yep, don't worry. You can play this on the go. Wii games on 3DS. I've already talked about this in its own separate video on Scott Stash. And it is one of those things where, you know, there isn't a ton of them, but there's more than you'd ever expect there to be. So one of the first major ones was Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D. I love this game, and this was the definitive version until the HD port on Nintendo Switch. Mainly because, like, hey, you know, you get extra levels in the game, and they also don't have you shake the damn Wii remote to roll or just pound the ground or blow or any of the other actions you got to do in this game on the Wii that requires motion controls for no damn reason. I love this game. I think this game is phenomenal, and it works incredibly well on the 3DS. The 3D effect is actually, like, pretty good in this game, considering there's a lot of times where you're hopping between the background and the foreground. You know, hey, the 3D effect is really well suited for this game. The only major problem with this game is the fact that they go from 60 frames per second on the Wii to 30 on the 3DS. It's obviously a downgrade. Like, I'm never gonna beg, plead, just yearn for 30 frames per second compared to 60 when it comes to video games. But, you know, it's still perfectly fine. Like, it's not like it's that much worse, you know, especially considering you're playing on a smaller screen. it's fine. And the game looks and runs really damn good on the platform. Way better than you'd really expect it to. We also had Xenoblade Chronicles 3D as a new 3DS exclusive. Really, this is kind of like the only major new 3DS exclusive worth a damn. And compared to the SNES games, this at least made sense to be new 3DS exclusive. Xenoblade Chronicles already barely ran on the Wii. You put it on the 3DS, it's like, holy shit, dude. Like, take a fucking chill pill. Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn. I remember when this got announced, there was some confusion whether this was going to be a new 3DS exclusive or not. I don't really see why it should have been. You know, the only reason why I think it would have made sense to be a new 3DS exclusive is if they just didn't want to put as much time into porting this to the 3DS. They just were like, hey, let's make it a new 3DS exclusive just so then, you know, like we're porting it to more powerful hardware. There's not as much we have to do, I guess. But no, you know, it works on the regular 3DS, and yeah, it's still Kirby's Epic Yarn. It does have a couple problems because, you know, they introduce some stuff like Devilish Mode, which is a harder mode, and it's harder, but it's kind of like arbitrarily harder. The fact that they just have this devil come out every now and then to just fuck around with you, it's more annoying than it is difficult. And they have these new power-ups that are kind of like, hey, you know, Kirby finally has power-ups in this game. Because that was kind of a sticking point with the original Kirby's Epic Yarn, the fact that Kirby wasn't inhaling enemies and turning into them. Well, here are some power-ups, and the game wasn't designed around them, so it's just, they're pretty pointless. But at the end of the day, it's still Kirby's Epic Yarn, but on the 3DS, I think it makes sense on this platform. There's also Rayman Origins on the 3DS, which was not only a Wii game, but an Xbox 360 and PS3 game, also on the Vita, and it was pretty crunchily ported to 3DS. Like, it doesn't look amazing, but it is still Rayman Origins. It's still on the platform. Kind of cool it was there so early on in the system's life. But I remember that port of the game kept getting delayed, and there was not a lot of word on, like, when it was coming out for a bit there, because the console versions came out in, like, late 2011. And I think the 3DS port took, like, within that year to release. And yeah, that game was not designed for a screen as small as the 3DS is. I mean, it all still works. It's fine, but there's no damn reason in the world to play it on 3DS these days. There's also Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate that released on 3DS. You know, the Wii game Monster Hunter Tri, it's just kind of a better version of that. So, you know, there's Wii stuff to play on 3DS. And if you want to make some weird excuses, you know, there's Pilotwings Resort, which is basically just the island flyover minigame in Wii Sports Resort, heavily expanded upon. But of course, you know, this is me being an idiot. Going like, oh, yes, see, it's a Wii game on 3DS, haha. But you know what would have been the most perfect system to put out on 3DS? Virtual Boy. Yes, Nintendo's 3D system, before their 3D system. Yeah, unfortunately, there's not really a ton to say here. You know, it would have made all the sense in the world for Nintendo to do Virtual Boy Virtual Console. Of course, they probably just didn't care to do that because there was, like, no market for it. Kind of just would have been, like, a cool, like, oh, things come full circle kind of thing. You know, I have some random things that, like, okay, like, we can mention this as a way to be like, hey, see, there you go, Virtual Boy is on 3DS. There's a microgame in WarioWare Gold based on Mario Clash from the Virtual Boy. Here's the thing, this game isn't even in 3D. So it's like, all right, hey, we finally get like a Virtual Boy something on 3DS, and it's not even in 3D. You can collect a Virtual Boy in Tomodachi Life. That's it. But to be fair, fans have taken this into their own hands, and if you hack a 3DS, you can get a Virtual Boy emulator working on it, and it runs flawlessly these days. So yeah, officially, there's not really much of a way to play Virtual Boy games on 3DS. There were like some spiritual successors to some Virtual Boy games, like Mutant Mudds was originally envisioned as kind of like, hey, like Virtual Boy Wario Land is pretty cool with the whole hopping between the foreground and background thing. Why don't we make a game kind of like that? So much so that there are levels in Mutant Mudds with like red and black color schemes as an homage to the original Virtual Boy. But I mean, like, yeah, it would have been the most perfect thing in the world, even to just do, like, just a standard one-cart release, you know, like a 3DS retail release. It's just the Virtual Boy Legacy Collection, and it's just, like, 10 Virtual Boy games. That's basically the entire library. I think it would have been just like a cool thing to get out of the way, just be like, hey, here you go. Here's a stupid ass part of our history, buddy. But regardless, instead, Nintendo found it more suitable to put fucking Wii U games on the 3DS. Welcome to Scott's funny nonsense segment. Yeah, they put out a bunch of Wii U games on 3DS once it was obvious the Wii U was not doing too hot. Of course, with the 3DS and Wii U being from the same generation, you will get some multiplats. You know, for example, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing Transformed, you know, that released alongside the Wii U version on 3DS. And then there's also, you know, Sonic Lost World, but, you know, the 3DS version is a different game compared to the Wii U one. There's also Lego City Undercover on Wii U, and The Chase Begins on 3DS. And The Chase Begins is more of like a prequel, but it is kind of a little bit of the same kind of like, okay, you're in Lego City and you're doing a lot of the same stuff, but it's not as good. But we do have actual ports here like Hyrule Warriors Legends, which is really impressive. It runs on the 3DS. I never want to play this game ever again in my fucking life. Definitely kind of a cool little novelty, but like, yeah, I don't really want to play Warriors games on the 3DS. And then you also have Mario Maker for 3DS. That is really cool, specifically because they have New Super Mario Bros. U running on the 3DS, and it looks just crunchy as hell. It's all so damn tiny, and I'm just like, I think it's really interesting. I think it's really cool to see that on 3DS. But Mario Maker does work fairly well on the handheld. I mean, just having the little touchscreen on the bottom and seeing it on the top screen, having all those old school Mario styles playable on the go, it was kind of cool, but they definitely kind of killed that port before it even released with the fact that you couldn't share your levels online. The only thing you could do with the online portion of that game was play certain stages uploaded to the Wii U version. You couldn't even look them up. You just had to go to Course World and be like, oh, what's here? I'll just play a random stage. Poochie and Yoshi's Woolly World is a port of Yoshi's Woolly World from the Wii U, and it's a wonderful port. It looks and runs fantastically. But again, you know, this is another topic that I've talked about before. Wii U games on 3DS. I kind of want to talk about something a little weird. Nintendo Switch games on 3DS. This is such an interesting little thing that happened a couple times. Of course, like, it isn't very prevalent. By the time the Nintendo Switch released, Nintendo kept the 3DS alive with kind of, you know, lower effort titles, just out of the fear that, hey, this ain't gonna fully work out. And with that, a couple of Nintendo Switch games actually made it to the 3DS day and date, along with, you know, 3DS versions. So this one right here would be Fire Emblem Warriors. You know, this was originally announced at the Nintendo Switch presentation in 2017, and then they announced like a week later, oh yeah, there's a new 3DS version too. I don't think many people even remember this is a thing. This is definitively like one of the only major, like, this is a Nintendo Switch game on 3DS. The other ones, like, you can make the argument like this is a Wii U game and this is a 3DS game on Nintendo Switch, but no, this is a Switch game on 3DS. And it runs pretty good for what it is. Like, it's a little weird, but yeah, this is a strange situation. I think it's mainly because, like, they knew it could run on 3DS. Hyrule Warriors Legends barely ran on the original 3DS. It ran okay on the new 3DS, so they were like, just make it a new 3DS exclusive. The 3DS already has a pretty large audience for Fire Emblem games, so why the hell not? But these two released around the same time in the summer of 2018. Captain Toad Treasure Tracker released alongside a Switch port, and this felt like the best 3DS port idea of all time. I mean, this game originated from Mario 3D World, which originated from Mario 3D Land, which was entirely built around the 3D effect of the 3DS. And I thought it was really cool that Nintendo went out of their way to make sure, like, this version has 3D. Because at this point in the 3DS's lifespan, they definitely were kind of getting a little iffy if games had the 3D effect or if they didn't. Like, as you can already see, Sushi Striker right here plays only in 2D. WarioWare Gold played only in 2D. The Mario and Luigi remakes, only in 2D. So it felt like they were like, nah, this needs to be in 3D. And this is like the version that released on Nintendo Switch. This newer version has a different ending that's supposed to link it to Mario Odyssey, which is just the most awkward thing in the world. I mean, I think the original Captain Toad Treasure Tracker had a great ending linking it to Mario 3D World. You know, you had all the Captain Toad stages in that game, and it perfectly made it so then, like, hey, this is a prequel to that game, and Captain Toad fell down the same clear pipe as the rest of the Mario gang. Like, I thought that ending was really cute. But then for this port, like, they had to like tie it into Mario Odyssey, and the ending is just way lamer. It doesn't make as much sense. And I'm like, okay, so what's the canonical reason for all of this? Because Captain Toad does appear in Mario Odyssey, but barely. Like, he's just kind of sitting around in some stages. So this just feels kind of like a little lame. But to be fair, the bonus levels included here, based on Mario Odyssey, they replace the stages that were ripped from Mario 3D World in the Wii U version. And those stages weren't really fun to play in. They were just kind of cool as bonus levels. These are actual levels, so, you know, that is kind of cool. And originally, I didn't really care for the Nintendo Switch version because it kind of felt a little, like, just kind of slapped onto the Nintendo Switch. You have this annoying cursor on screen at all times. Yeah. Felt like the game was a little too designed around the use of the Wii U gamepad. As much as the Wii U gamepad is unnecessary most of the time, damn it, Captain Toad was designed around it. Which, in my opinion, makes it feel a lot more at home on the 3DS, having the touchscreen on the bottom screen at all times. It is a little strange considering, like, it just doubles what you're viewing on both screens, so you just see two of the same thing at all times. But regardless, like, I think this works brilliantly on the 3DS, and it also looks and runs really good. So this, I mean, is a Wii U port, but it's also, like, it's a port of the Nintendo Switch port of the Wii U game, so, you know, it kind of counts. And Sushi Striker, this was originally just a 3DS game. It was announced as a 3DS game at E3 2017, but then eventually they announced the Nintendo Switch version. And I really like this game. I think it's a fun, addictive puzzle game. Damn it, I mean, it's the same thing over and over again. It's very repetitive, but it is very satisfying and addictive. And I do find that this was obviously designed for 3DS first. On Nintendo Switch, you know, you can play with the controller, and it feels very a little automated, but it also feels very satisfying to use the thumbstick to connect the plates of sushi in the game. But this game does feel very designed around, you know, two screens and being able to use, you know, the stylus pen to connect the plates of sushi. You know, just having your opponent on the top screen and your screen on the bottom. It just all makes sense. Not that the Nintendo Switch version doesn't make sense, but, you know, this was designed for 3DS. So, if anything, this was a little more of, like, 3DS game brought to Nintendo Switch at the exact same time the 3DS version released. But hey, like, there you go. Those are all the Nintendo generations, for the most part, playable on the 3DS. And, you know, I could keep on going. I mean, just with WarioWare Gold itself, there are so many little things in this game that are like, okay, well, there you go. That's your Nintendo generation represented on the 3DS. I mean, I completely forgot. You have like a Wind Waker game represented in WarioWare Gold, a Mario Sunshine game, Pikmin 2, and only one Virtual Boy game. It's just dumb as hell, man. You have a 3D handheld after doing a 3D system before. You can easily just put those old games on this one and have them actually playable in 3D and like on a popular system. And it's just like, you just don't do it. And when you actually have a Virtual Boy game slightly, and I'm talking slightly, like it's a mini game based on a Virtual Boy game, playable, it's not even in 3D in WarioWare Gold. Why the hell is Virtual Boy barely on 3DS in an official capacity? Oh, that's right. It's the Virtual Boy.